Yeah.
So as a leader, I think, and as any entrepreneur that's trying to get things done through other people, is really taking the time to really understand what the other person is saying. And that really comes through asking great questions, and guiding whatever they're saying, guiding it through great questions. And they're going to really appreciate you for that, for taking the time to ask those questions. And that brings me, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was going to say, my mentor always says, be more interested than interesting, because that means you're listening. That's from David Meltzer. And I just love that quote because it goes along with exactly what you're saying, is paying attention to what people are trying to communicate to you.
Yeah. And, it might sound a bit cloudy, a bit fluffy, but hey, it's the North Star. If you can get this right, and you can get it right in any number of ways, like there is not one method to do this, but when that is your North Star, when that is your intent, then you will figure out a way. Because you're lined up on the destination, right? So you'll figure out a way to get there, and that is simply to listen and to ask great questions.
Yeah.
The third one is people need to feel appreciated. They need to feel appreciated for the contributions that they make, and we're so busy these days that we forget to say thank you. We forget to pat someone on the back. We forget to stop and recognize someone for their achievements because we're so busy with what we want. We're so busy with our own personal development and growing our own companies. And sometimes it just takes a little moment just to slow down and to give people your time, which is your most valuable asset. It runs out for all of us. And when you can give that to someone else by simply just standing still and recognizing them and appreciating their contributions, then that goes an enormous way, a really long way. And it's actually much more important than the salary they're earning.
Yeah,
as long as that meets the basic needs, the basic requirements, then it's appreciation that people really want. And the fourth one is a sense of importance. They want to know that they matter. They want to know that they're getting up for something that's important enough in the morning. They're turning up to work on a Monday morning for something that's important, for something that means something to them, for something that's important enough that they can share it with their friends and their colleagues, and it gives them significance, right? And so just these four things. There are six. There are actually seven basic human needs, but I just boil down to these four things, and they've served me really well. Like everything I do needs to meet these four things, making people feel heard, understood, appreciated, and important. And that is 90% of the puzzle right there.
Is that part of your success in the companies that you've had so far, or is that something that you've learned along the way?
Okay, now I've got to tell you that just about every one of my companies have failed. Just about every company has failed. One of them did well. One of them did over 10 million. And the rest were just experiments and learning, And even that $10 million company, that still failed. I went through a liquidation. I went through a bankruptcy because I wasn't clean enough with my taxes across Europe. I migrated from one country to another, and I was the entrepreneur usually doesn't know how to do the accounting and the legal stuff, right? I had two companies, for example, in two different countries, and I didn't have contracts with myself. I didn't have to. I own those companies. But in Europe, it's actually not legally required to have contracts between your own companies. However, when the taxation office doesn't understand why you're transferring money from one company to the other, that's when the contract becomes really handy. What's the work agreement between these two companies?
Yeah,
I didn't have that, and that caused me a big problem. I had to liquidate to go bankrupt in one of my companies for that. But it was an enormous learning lesson, right? I mean, you learn through your failures. Through your mistakes.
Yeah, by the way, not to cut you off here, Chris, but this is a good learning for our listeners. If you do own your own business, maybe you're a beginning entrepreneur. As Chris said, he owned his own company. Having a contract as an employee, so if you're the CEO of your own company and having a contract as an employee could also save your butt on a buyout, especially if you put debt on the books that were owed to you. That debt could be paid back to you. You could have an employment contract with yourself in case you got bought out, and then they wanted to move you out. Having an employment contract would protect yourself from that. So I'm really glad you brought that up because it doesn't come up very often, but it really could save your butt if you have an employment contract, even if it's your own company. So sorry to derail a little bit of what you're saying, but what a great point to make.
No, that's really cool, Jim. Maybe I should hire you as my advisor now.
Well, You learn a lot when you own your own company, especially when you take on investors, and a lot of the things that you're talking about, the communication and how to foster people along, are so important to owning your own business. But you have to think about the little things as well, and sometimes that's contracts and stuff that we don't want to think about. By the way, I sympathize with you because I also am terrible at accounting, and I own 3 companies right now. And thank goodness for people that do appreciate and like accounting, because I am not one of them. So I'm on your page as well.
Yeah.
You like you said, you've had several companies, and here you are on the speaking tour. Give us a taste of what your TED Talk sounds like, or some of these speeches, because I know you've got a fascinating background, and you're so humble to say that, by the way, most of those companies didn't make it. What is it that you're pulling out from your past and teaching others?
So when I did my PhD, it was from 2001 to 2007. And in the second year, I made a major discovery. I discovered the first drug-dependent virus in the HIV field. Mm-hmm. I discovered the 2 mutations that cause that drug dependency. And through a process of cloning, I managed to develop a vaccine against HIV, which gave me 10 publications in the end. I only needed 2. And in 2003, they asked me to go to Long Island, just out of New York City, to give a presentation on my discovery. And it was at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, where, Francis Crick and Watson and Crick discovered DNA there, right, back in 1953. It's a big scientific park with a massive auditorium. And I was just, asked to give a presentation there, a 10-minute presentation. And there were 1,000 people in that audience. And the front row was actually many Nobel laureates in medicine in that front row. Mm-hmm. And all I can remember was I was sitting on the side of the auditorium, like sitting on the stairs, close to the exit door, because I was about to throw up, and my speech was coming up. And the only thing I could think about was, I hope it doesn't come out on stage, like in front of 1,000 people. And just before they called me up, luckily it started to come out. So I ran outside, I threw up in the bushes. And then I came back in, wiped my mouth, and I think moments later I stepped up on stage and gave my 10-minute presentation. I don't remember what it was. I don't remember what I said. I knew it was something. It was 10 PowerPoint slides. That's all I remember. And now that I look back at that moment, because I never presented for 13 years after that, I never dared to get back up on stage again. Mm-hmm. And what boggled my mind a couple of years ago, no, even 1.5 years ago when I started on this journey is, hang on a second, I was 29 years old back then. Why didn't they teach me this stuff at school? Like, I just kept thinking, oh my God, now that I'm a competent speaker, why it took me 42 years to learn it. Like, what if I'd learned that in my teens or before I started my first business? Yeah. Like, oh my God, because now I see that all my success is coming through speaking and the ability to communicate effectively. And so I'm on a mission now to try and get this into people, ideally at a younger age. You're never too young, but, if I can reach kids with this, then that is, that's exponential for me, right? You set them on a whole new trajectory. And that really is one of the catalysts of why I considered being a speaker, because it was the most frightening thing of all for me. As any entrepreneur, entrepreneurship is frightening. You take an enormous amount of risk. It's very uncertain. You could go, it can go south. It doesn't. Most businesses fail. And then when you have kids at home and all of that, it can be quite scary. So, but I do have an entrepreneurial mindset, and I do like taking risk, and I do like doing the hard work, and I do like putting myself in places where I'm uncomfortable, because places that hurt, right? Because that's where you really feel alive, right? The more pain you feel, the more alive you feel. It probably doesn't apply for everyone, but it certainly applies to me. And so public speaking was the most uncomfortable place of all. And I said, if I can conquer that, I can conquer anything. And so I went for it. 1.5 years ago, I quit my job. It was a 6-figure job. I was a strategic director for the largest performance agency in the Netherlands. And I had 3 kids at the time, and my money had sort of run out. So I didn't have much money. Actually, I had no money at all. And on the 1st of August last year, I decided to start a new business called 10x Digital. And I decided to give myself a challenge. Everything I do, every business I bring in has has to come from speaking or speaking-related activities.
Mm-hmm.
I'd just taken a speaker training, 5 days, intense, and so I wanted to play the game. You know, I'd had a successful business before, so I just wanted to play the game again. I'd been in a corporate organization for 2.5 years, and I had enough. And so by month 1, no money. I was on peanut butter and crackers because I got 3 kids that had to be fed. Right? Month 2, I got my first gig in Vienna. It only paid me $500 for the flight. It was the closing keynote to the European Print Conference. Remember, I was strategic director for a performance agency, so they wanted me to talk about the future of print in the digital ecosystem. So that's how I got the invite. In month 3, on the 3rd of October, about 60 days in, I got a call from my agent, because I got an agent as a speaker, and he asked me, would you like to do a TED Talk? Because I've been telling him I want to do a TED Talk, and that is something that you need as a speaker on your journey, right? Uh-huh. And at that time, I was sick in bed. I had fever, I had a sore throat, my voice was at about 50%, and I just said, sure, when? And he goes, tomorrow. and that like the shock you get, like, oh my God, here the thing that I want, and I'm not 100%. I'm not fit. But I couldn't tell him that, because my first and biggest audience to date, my biggest audience to date was over 1,200 people. It was the global summit for the largest law firm in the Netherlands. And it was the next day. It was on the Friday, and he called me on the Wednesday. Mm-hmm. And it was the first time I was also representing him, and the first time I was getting paid a significant amount of money to speak. And so I didn't tell him I was sick. I couldn't. I didn't want to make him nervous. And so I just said, no problem. And then I went ahead to call what I did before I called the event manager, I called a TEDify coach. I just wanted, because I'd met her a couple of weeks ago, and I had her on WhatsApp, so I quickly called her. She answered, and when I said I've got the opportunity to do a TED Talk tomorrow, she simply said, don't do it. Wow. And she repeated that 3 times. Wow. Don't do it. Don't do it. And to me, that made all the sense in the world. I'm sick in bed. You got to prepare months for a TED Talk, right? Who goes into a TED Talk unprepared on like the day after? Like, a TED Talk is something that you do right. It goes on YouTube. If you do a bad one, it'll ruin your career, especially as a speaker. And she goes, don't do it, Chris. You'll get another chance. You're just starting on this journey. And what I did was, as an entrepreneur, you persevere through these things, right? You're getting resistance left, right, and center, and nobody's agreeing with you, and you have to push through. And so I said, well, listen, at least hear me out. At least let me tell you the story I want to give in 3 minutes. This happened in a matter of minutes, just as I'm telling it now. And so I gave her that 3 minutes, and there was silence, and she just said, Chris, you're ready. That's all she said. Wow. And that brought tears to my eyes right then and there when I was doing it. And then I got off the phone with her. I called the event manager, and this was at the TEDx University of Amsterdam. And that was the perfect place to do my first TEDx talk, because I got my PhD at the University of Amsterdam. And so I spoke to the event manager. We had a great conversation. And then at the end of the call, oh, by the way, the theme this year is crossing borders. So I didn't know this. I didn't know TED Talks had themes. Mm-hmm. And I speak about technology, and I speak about relationships. So I went to bed that night without a story. And I was really, really nervous again. But as an entrepreneur, what do? Well, you set your alarm for 5 a.m., right? You get up early. And by 7 a.m., I had my speech all crafted out on my speech map. I've been trained for this. And I made it in the morning. I created the title of the speech, which was "The Choice is Yours." It needs to be short. It needs to be snappy. It needs to be an idea worth spreading. And it's the last words you use in your TED Talk. That was all clinical. The choice is yours. I made that up on the train on the way there, and I delivered that speech in the afternoon. And it was rated best TED Talk of the day. It was the most relevant to crossing borders, and it went viral on YouTube. And that resulted in over at least 20,000 in direct business since then. This was last October. But it also gave me credibility. It helps an agent sell you to the stage now because you have a TED Talk. And then so I did that TEDx talk. And then the next day I opened my first major keynote with the story of the day before, with simply asking the question, what if someone asked you to do a big presentation tomorrow or to do a TEDx talk tomorrow? What would you say? Would you say yes or would you say no? And that's how I start a lot of my presentations now. And by the way, that client, the presentation